This is Debt Free in 30, where every week we take 30 minutes and talk to industry experts about debt, money, and personal finance. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
So let's get started. Who are you and what do you do?
By day, I work in digital marketing, but by night and weekends and all other hours of the day, I am a blogger and podcaster over at Mo Money, Mo Houses.
And so, well, first of all, tell us your name.
Oh, yeah. My name is Jessica Moorhouse.
Okay. So
sort of important.
Yeah, there we go. Let's not bury the lead here. So Jessica, tell me about your website. Tell me about your blog. First of all, why the name?
It's kind of an onion. There's a lot of layers, surprisingly. But so I started my blog 3.5 years ago. And it was actually a name suggested by my first roommate. She thought it was kind of a funny play on words because my last name is Moorhouse. And, you know, the rap song Mo Money, Mo Problems. Maybe you don't know it, but
no,
it was
sorry. I'm
not familiar.
So you're going to have to walk me through slowly here today.
Well, it was a big hit back when we were growing up, Mo Money, Mo Problems. And so she thought that'd be kind of a funny play on words, Mo Money, Mo Houses. And also when I was getting into personal finance blogs and just books and stuff like that, I really got interested in real estate. And I thought, wow, it would be amazing if one day I could own a bunch of houses and rent them out and make an income that way. So that's kind of the second layer to that name.
So Mo Money, Mo Houses with Mo spelled M-O. That's where people can find you. And I'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, it's just momoneymohouses.com. Super simple.
Easy to find. So Right now you're talking to me from Toronto, but you're not originally from Toronto. So wind back the clock and how did you get here?
How did I get here? Well, so I'm originally from Vancouver, and I've been in Toronto for 2 years now. We just hit the 2-year mark July 1st. And, me and my husband, we both grew up in Vancouver, and we loved it. I still love Vancouver. It's a beautiful place. But when we're kind of considering, where we saw our lives and our careers, Vancouver just didn't seem like the right place to be at that moment. And we kind of looked at, a map and we're like, okay, where do you want to go? And it was kind of between Montreal and Toronto, but, my husband doesn't know French. My French is very poor. So Toronto was kind of the best option for us to kind of jumpstart our careers. So we sold all of our stuff, packed what, stuff that we did keep into our little hatchback car, and we drove from Vancouver to Toronto.
Very cool. And that's really the reason I wanted to have you on the podcast today and the radio show is I want to talk about how to manage big life changes because, for many of the people we help at our firm, people have gone through job loss and other issues, and it's the change that ends up, either leading to problems or hopefully leading to better things. So let's start with when you relocated to Toronto, you didn't have a job.
No, neither of us had jobs.
Neither one of you had jobs. So I guess, what were you thinking? What was the move like? How did you prepare for it? Give me some of the story on that.
Sure. I mean, it was a pretty ballsy move. I must say, looking back, I'm like, I can't believe we did that because I had a full-time job. I quit it. My husband's a freelancer, but, moving meant that he had to kind of give up all of those contacts because they're all local contacts. And, we did just get married as well, and that wasn't a cheap event. So, but at the same time, we had this idea that we were going to do this for, about maybe a year and a half or 2 years, kind of when we were actually planning our wedding. We also kind of planned this big move. And so we kind of budgeted it accordingly. We were, made sure that we just saved kind of every dollar because we had this big goal in mind to move to Toronto and kind of start a new life. And it wasn't just, let's move and see what happens. It's like we really want to make a good go of it because we really did, hope that this move would really help our careers. We'd get bigger salaries and, my husband works in the music industry, and so this was a big chance because there's a huge music industry in Toronto. And so it was, we're kind of, we got to try it. This is a big risk, but it could be a big payoff. And we felt like if we just stayed at Vancouver, we probably, I don't know if we'd be in the same position right now. And right now we're doing pretty good. We're happy where we are.
Well, and I guess that's the ultimate test then. So for listeners who may be considering relocating, to, prevent going into debt, what are the most important things that they should prepare for or know before making that kind of a decision?
Well, definitely have an emergency savings, and more than you think you're going to need, because we spent way more than we thought we would. And I mean, I'm a frugal person being a personal finance blogger, so I was kind of shocked at how expensive the big move was, setting up, in a new apartment, getting new furniture, because we sold all of our furniture. And I mean, I think I may have written about the final number, but I recently did a podcast episode about this specific move, and I think I said, I'm going to ballpark it at like $10,000, which is that's a big chunk of change. So, but we budgeted and we saved for a while in order to make this happen. And we're also lucky that we weren't unemployed for that long. It still was long, quite long in my mind, but we were able to start finding streams of income within a couple months, which was helpful. But, in terms of, preventing getting into debt, I'd say you really do need to have quite a bit of cash in hand and in your bank account, because if you're just like, well, I just need a couple $1,000s and then I'll put the rest on credit, and then once I get a job, then I'll pay off that debt, probably not the best idea.
So it's going to take more cash than you think.
Absolutely.
And that's probably a universal rule that applies to everything.
Mm-hmm.
If you start with that, then you're probably good. Now, you are, I don't think I'm giving out any secrets here, are a millennial.
I am.
And what does that mean exactly? Is there a definition of that? Or, I mean, you're not a senior citizen. We know that.
I'm not,
so.
Millennials, I mean, and that's a big buzzword. It's just a generation of people. And I think I read somewhere that it's people that are aged like, I don't know, 23 to 35 or something like that. It's actually a pretty broad age range. But basically, it's just people that grew up, I'd say, were kids in like the 90s.
Okay.
Or early 2000s, possibly.
And I guess the issue with being a millennial is life is different now than what it was like, when I grew up the 70s and the 80s, I guess. I graduated from university in the early 80s, I think, 1983 or 84, somewhere around there. When I graduated, and maybe it was 1987, I don't know. I'll have to check my bio. When I graduated, there were lots of jobs, so I hit it just right. The recession was over, things were booming. I had my choice of jobs. It's different now for millennials, though. Right now, job security, it's harder to come by. There's a lot more temp work. There was no such thing as temp work when I graduated from university. You either got a job or you didn't. There's more internships, contract jobs are much more popular. So now you mentioned that your husband is a freelancer. So how does someone who's a freelancer prepare for this kind of uncertainty then when you're contemplating a big move like this?
Oh, gosh. Well, yeah, that's kind of the tricky thing about being a freelancer, especially in the arts industry. He never really knows how much he's going to make month to month, year to year until he does his taxes. So it was tricky. I obviously, since I've always had like the full-time job, I am probably a bigger saver and bigger budgeter than him. And so I think we kind of balanced it out a little bit like that. But at the same time, whereas for me, since I am, I do like working for a company and being an employee in that respect, I kind of have to wait to get a job to make income. Whereas for him, he can do a variety of different things to make some money. So when we actually first moved here, it took me about maybe 2 or 3 months to find like a stable full-time job. But for him, he's an audio engineer by trade, but he also has a lot of other skills. So in Vancouver, he actually also used to be a theater tech. And so he found similar companies to what he worked for in Vancouver. And they're just, kind of on-call jobs, whatever, but they paid kind of a decent wage. And so when we landed here, it's like, well, until I, start building up a client base for my audio engineer business, I'm going to, contact these theater companies and see if I can get some work. And it's a labor job, really. Like lots of the work is really physically arduous and tough, and he really didn't like it. But it was one way that he could make money. So he was kind of had that in his field. So that was one way that he may not have saved up as much as I did prior, but he was able to make money faster once we got here.
And so you've got to be willing to take what you can get.
Oh, yeah. And we both did. Like, don't get me wrong. I worked some, questionable jobs when I got here just so I can, make a living. And I didn't want to feel like, oh, well, I didn't want to turn down anything because I needed money, I needed to pay the rent. So I definitely did a few jobs, and I'm like, oh, wow, I can't believe I did that.
But it was something you wanted. You wanted to move here, and so you had to take the risk. That's the first part of my conversation with Jessica Moorhouse. She and her husband moved from Vancouver to Toronto with no jobs lined up, but they were willing to take that risk. Another risk is going back to school, and I'll get Jessica's thoughts on that right after the break.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30 with Doug Hoyes. We'll be right back.
Feeling overwhelmed and crushed by money problems? Not sure where to turn to find the right answers to your questions? There's a website that helps you find the solutions to your money problems. It's called moneyproblems.ca, and it's your best resource for information on solving your money problems. For help today, visit moneyproblems.ca.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
My guest today is Jessica Moorhouse, and we're discussing big life changes. To start this segment, I asked Jessica about going back to school. You've also discussed, reading through your blog, momoneymohouses.com, going back to school to, supplement your BA and working experience. Student loan debt is something that we've talked a lot about lately because it affects so many of our people. Many of our clients have student loan debt, and a study that we do every year, 2 years, called Joe Debtor found that females are especially impacted by student loan because of factors like maternity leave, job instability, taking a leave from work to care for family. So as someone who has worked to pay off your student loans on your own, how did you tackle the debt, and what's your advice for, people who are trying to do the same thing?
Yeah, well, so yeah, my only experience with student debt was when I was doing my undergrad, and I was able to finance my whole degree by myself. I worked part-time and I worked a lot of hours, but I was very, proud of myself for doing that. But still, in my last year, I was there for 5 years. I didn't have all the funds I needed to pay for my last year of tuition. So I did have to get a student loan, and it did take me, I don't know, it was very small. It was like only $5,000, but still, when you're a student, you're like, that's a lot of money. So it took me about 6 months to pay that off. And then after that, I'm like, I really don't want to get in debt again. I really hated that feeling of owing somebody money and paying interest on the money I owed. I just hated it. So when we moved here and I realized, in order to kind of switch careers, I'd previously kind of worked more in a sales advertising role. I knew I wanted to work more in marketing. I knew I had to go back to school. I knew that would definitely help me. And it did, because it did help me get my current job. But so I realized I had to go back to school, which was kind of a big blow to the ego, because I'm like, I just spent 5 years and thousands of dollars on a degree. I can't believe I have to go back to school to get a job. But so is life. So is being a millennial. So yeah, I went back to school, and it was tough. Luckily, I did shop around. There's a lot of schools out there, a lot of digital marketing programs, and I found one at U of T that seemed like the best, but also the cheapest, I guess, or just the most reasonable. It was only 3 courses. Each course was only $700. There was no books, and you could do it online, so I could also work while I was going to school. So financially, it made the most sense to go there, and luckily, because of that, I didn't have to take out a loan to go back to school.
Gotcha. Well, and I'm a graduate of U of T many years ago, obviously, and I think a whole year cost back then what a course costs today. So that's, a big difference. So let me ask you a profound philosophical question here, and that is, so student loans, do you see education as, good debt, a student loan as good debt?
It's a tricky thing. I feel like it can be, but the tricky thing with me is since I did put myself through school and only got a very small loan, I don't have the same, I guess, perception of student loan debt, I think, as lots of other students that had to pay for their whole degree through student loans that couldn't for some reason pay for it. for me, I just didn't like when I finished school, and I had lots of friends who had like $50,000 in debt from student loans. And I'm like, I can't imagine having that much debt. And they felt like they were drowning, and they also felt like that was an impossible number to pay off. Now, for me, I think it's a good I think education is always a good investment, but I think some people, young students, especially, in schools, we're not really taught about money until we're out in the real world spending it, which I think is unfortunate, which is part of the reason I started my blog. But I think lots of people think that they have to take out a student loan to pay for their whole degree, when there's a lot of other ways to fund your degree. There's scholarships, there's grants, you can get a job. There are other opportunities, but I think lots of people don't realize this. And so they fund their entire degree. And sometimes, let's be honest, people will take out a big loan on a degree that they may not use. And I'm there. I got a fine arts degree in film production. I'm not using that. I'm in digital marketing now. But there's a lot of people doing degrees that they're spending like $50,000 and then they're not even using it. And then they have to go back to school for something that's a little bit more practical. So in that respect, probably not the best investment. I think I don't know. I think a lot of the issues today is high school students are told that they need to go to school to get a job, but they're not really maybe pointed in the right direction of what they should do. And the thing is, I think a lot of kids think, oh, you have to go to university. Well, that's not necessarily true. You can make a really good living if you go to school for a trade. And I have a lot of people and lots of my husband's high school friends that went to BCIT, a technical college, to learn a trade. And they're making really good money. They own their own house and they're doing really well. So university isn't the only option for education as well.
So if I had a time machine and we could go back to just before you were to start your undergraduate program, knowing what you now know, what would you be telling yourself?
I mean, I'd like to say that if I could go back, I would do the communications program at SFU where I went, but I don't really like living with regrets, and I don't regret my film degree because it made me who I am. I love doing my degree. It was the best 5 years of my life, honestly. I learned a ton, and a lot of, not necessarily like, am I a filmmaker now? No, but I've used a lot of my skills in my marketing job. And like, I don't think I would have been able to start a website and now a podcast if I hadn't had those technical skills I learned in film school. So I don't regret my film degree, but if I had kids, I'd definitely be like, well, just so you know, if you're going to do a fine arts degree, you're probably not going to make a very good income once you leave. So
do you think it's important to look to the last chapter then? I'm going to university, I'm going to college. Should I be asking whether there's a job there when I come out, or should I treat the education as kind of a standalone thing?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, and that's something I didn't do. I didn't think about what job I could get after school. I'm just like, I'll figure that out later, because you think you have the world. You have 5 years, 4 years. You think that's an eternity as, a 20-year-old. But no, I think it's definitely important to look at what kind of jobs are out there with the degree that you want. And it's tough, though, when you're, 18, 19 and starting university. You don't even know what those jobs mean. And to be fair, the job that I have currently didn't exist when I went to school. Digital marketing wasn't a thing. Facebook wasn't even a thing, So it's kind of tricky because some of the jobs that these people might be getting don't exist yet. Then again, I think it's important to always have that in mind. Like, what are you going to do out of school?
And that's where it gets tricky, trying to decide when you're 17 or 18 years old what you want to do when you're 50. So that's great, Jessica. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with me today. Tell us again, what's the website? What's the podcast?
Sure. So you can find my blog and my podcast at momoneymohouses.com, and specifically my podcast, momoneymohouses.com/podcast. I have all my episodes listed on there.
And you
Thanks
can
so much for having me.
Hey, no problem. You can subscribe to that on iTunes as well. That's how I get it, and presumably all the other podcasting applications get it on your phone or whatever. It's
SoundCloud, Stitcher. I'm everywhere.
It's all there, and the format of your podcast. They're about half an hour, and it's generally you having a conversation. Exactly like we've done today, and I think your focus is more on the millennial generation, obviously, than seniors, but most of the things you talk about are universal financial principles. So I think they apply to everyone.
Yeah, it's just exploring other people's money stories. And sometimes they're bloggers that I know, sometimes they're authors, but some of them are just people that are friends of friends that I'm like, oh, that's cool. They started their own business, or that's cool. They're making extra money this way. I should probably talk to them. I think people would really get something out of that. So
yeah, great. And it's been interesting for me to listen to it as well. Well, great. Thanks very much for joining me today, Jessica.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Thank you.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30 with Doug Hoyes. We'll be right back.
Too much debt? You can make a deal to eliminate your debts that stops collection calls and legal action. It's called a consumer proposal. To find out how it works, visit consumer-proposals.org. You have options. You owe it to yourself to be informed. Help is at consumer-proposals.org.
If you're struggling with debt, you need expert, qualified help. At Hoyes Michaelos, you always meet with a local licensed bankruptcy trustee, an expert who understands your struggles. We can help you solve your debt problems. To find out more, visit Hoyes.com. That's HOYES.com. And let's get started.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Welcome back. It's time for the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. On today's show, Jessica Moorhouse shared her strategies for making big life changes, like moving to a new city or going back to school. Her advice is to have a plan, crunch the numbers, and save up money in advance. That's the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. I agree with Jessica's approach. Big changes are often difficult, but for Jessica, moving to a new city halfway across the country and going back to school was worth it. If you're considering big life changes, calculate the costs, but also calculate the future benefits. Then do what Jessica did. Crunch the numbers and make a plan. That's our show for today. Full show notes are available on our website, including links to Jessica's website, mohouses.com. So please go to our website at hoyes.com, that's HOYES.com, for more information. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.
Thanks for listening. That was Debt Free in 30.